The hot summer sun beat down mercilessly on the old streets of Georgetown when Detective Darius Lison's phone rang with a shrill trill. The clock in the corner of his office showed that it was just after 9 in the morning, too early for personal calls, too late for emergency calls from the night shift. Darius put down his half-finished coffee and picked up the receiver, expecting to hear the voice of the officer on duty. "Detective Lison?" The female voice on the other end sounded reserved and professional. "This is Dr. Aisha Dawson from the District of Columbia Department of Health. We need to meet, in person, today, if possible." Darius grimaced. The Department of Health rarely contacted detectives working on serious cases, and it never boded well. "Is it serious, Dr. Dawson?" "I'm afraid so, and extremely sensitive. I'd rather not discuss it over the phone." "In an hour at the Bluegrass Cafe on M Street. Do you know the place?" "Yes," the woman replied. "I'll be there." The heat was almost palpable, and Darius opted for a light linen jacket instead of his usual leather one. The weather didn't match his mood, heavy and gloomy. 2 months ago, he had closed the case of a serial rapist in Adams Morgan, and a week ago, he had buried his partner, who had been killed in the line of duty. 45 years old, graying temples, a 16-year-old daughter who had grown increasingly distant since her mother's death 3 years ago. The Bluegrass Cafe was located between an antique shop and a designer clothing boutique. The place was quiet enough for confidential conversations, but not so secluded as to attract attention. Darius arrived first, took a table in the far corner, and ordered another coffee. Dr. Dawson appeared 10 minutes later, a short woman with short dreadlocks, wearing a strict suit and carrying a leather folder under her arm. Her gaze quickly found Darius. "Detective Lison?" She held out her hand. "Aisha Dawson, epidemiologist, specializing in infectious diseases." Her handshake was firm and confident. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me so quickly," she said, sitting down in the chair opposite him. "What I'm about to tell you is strictly confidential, and to be honest, I'm not sure there's a crime here." Darius raised an eyebrow questioningly. "You see," Aisha lowered her voice, "over the past 2 years, we've had 5 new cases of HIV infection diagnosed among women in Georgetown. In itself, this is unfortunately not unusual, but the coincidence was discovered during routine epidemiological surveys." She opened a folder and placed a sheet of paper with 5 women's names in front of the detective. Chanel Wilkins, 32 years old. Kimberly Jones, 27 years old. Brianna Higgins, 34 years old. Destiny Brooks, 29 years old. Latoya Monroe, 35 years old. 5 different women, different ages, from different neighborhoods, different professions. The only thing they have in common is that at some point in the last 3 years, they were all in a relationship with a man named Leon Tucker. Darius studied the list carefully. "And you don't think that's a coincidence?" "Statistically, it's practically impossible," Aisha replied. "What's more, 3 of the 5 women mentioned that Tucker insisted on unprotected sex, assuring them that he was clean and got tested regularly." "Wait a minute." Darius put down his pen. "Are you suggesting that this man is deliberately infecting his partners?" Aisha took a deep breath. "I'm not suggesting anything, detective. I'm just presenting you with the facts. Perhaps he doesn't know his status, although that's unlikely. Perhaps there's no intent here. But 5 women, detective. 5 lives that will never be the same." Darius rubbed his chin. The case was complicated from every angle. Proving intentional HIV infection was extremely difficult. But if Dr. Dawson was right, and this Leon Tucker was really doing this on purpose, what do you know about him? "Not much," Aisha said, pulling out another sheet. 40 years old. Works as a pharmacist for the Healthway pharmacy chain. Lives in an upscale neighborhood in Georgetown. Single. According to the women who mentioned him, he's wealthy and charming. Member of several community organizations. He regularly participates in charity events. He doesn't sound like a sociopath spreading a deadly disease," Darius remarked. "That's why I came to you and not straight to the prosecutor's office," Aisha replied. "Something doesn't add up here, but the coincidence is too obvious to ignore." Darius took the papers and put them in his jacket's inside pocket. "I'll see what I can do. But keep in mind that an official investigation could seriously affect the lives of everyone involved." I understand, Aisha nodded. But these women deserve justice, or at least the truth. After meeting with Dr. Dawson, Darius returned to the office. In the empty office, he laid out the materials he had received and thought for a moment. Before delving deeper into the case, he needed to gather more information, and he had to proceed with caution. Accusations of intentional HIV transmission could ruin someone's life, even if they turned out to be unfounded. First, Darius checked Leon Tucker in the police database. He was as clean as a whistle. No parking tickets, no calls to the police, not a single complaint. Then he moved on to social media. Tucker's account looked flawless. Photos from charity events, professional achievements, travel. No signs of aggression or misogyny. The next step was to check the victims. Darius made several calls, using old connections at insurance companies, hospitals, even the pharmaceutical licensing board. By evening, he had accumulated a small stack of notes. Chanel Wilkins, elementary school teacher, diagnosed 18 months ago. Relationship with Tucker lasted about 3 months. Kimberly Jones, florist, diagnosed 2 years ago, shortly after breaking up with Tucker. The relationship lasted 6 months. Brianna Higgins, accountant, diagnosed a year ago. She dated Tucker for 4 months. Destiny Brooks, a hairdresser, was diagnosed 10 months ago. She was with Tucker for about 2 months. Latoya Monroe, a hotel manager, is the most recent case, diagnosed 3 months ago. Her relationship with Tucker lasted almost a year and ended shortly before she was diagnosed. The pattern was clear. Leon Tucker dated each of these women for between 2 months and a year, after which the relationship ended and the woman soon learned of her HIV-positive status. But was this a malicious scheme or a tragic coincidence? To get a more complete picture, Darius decided to meet with one of the women. Latoya Monroe was the most recent case, and her relationship with Tucker had lasted longer than the others. If anyone could shed light on the situation, it was her. The next morning, after several phone calls, Darius sat in the small cafeteria of the Jefferson Hotel, where Latoya Monroe worked as a senior guest services manager. She agreed to meet during her lunch break, but insisted on neutral territory. Latoya was a tall, statuesque woman with smooth, dark skin and attentive eyes. She carried herself with dignity, but Darius immediately noticed the tension in her shoulders and the caution in her movements. "I don't quite understand why the police are interested in my health, detective," she said, sitting down across from Darius. "This is a confidential investigation, Miss Monroe," Darius replied. "I'm not here to cause you any additional distress, but I need to ask you a few questions about Leon Tucker." At the mention of that name, Latoya visibly tensed. "What do you want to know?" "How did you meet him?" "At a charity event for a children's hospital. I was representing our hotel. Leon was one of the sponsors. He's charming, smart, caring. At least he seemed that way." "When did you start dating?" "A little over a year ago. At first, everything was wonderful. He knew how to make a woman feel special. Flowers, unexpected gifts, weekends in romantic places. When you first became intimate, did you use protection?" Latoya lowered her eyes. "At first, yes. But then, Leon said he got tested regularly because of his job in pharmaceuticals. He said he loved me and wanted real intimacy, and I believed him." "When and how did your relationship end?" "About 4 months ago. He started to distance himself. He called less often and canceled our dates. When I tried to talk to him, he blamed it on work and stress, and then he just said he didn't feel the same way anymore and that it would be better if we broke up before we became enemies." "And when did you find out about your diagnosis?" Latoya pressed her lips together. "A month after we broke up. I was getting my annual employee health checkup. When the results came back..." She fell silent. "You know, I couldn't even believe it. I thought it was a mistake. I got a second test, then another one." "Did you contact Leon after that?" "No. At first I was in shock, then depressed. I didn't immediately connect the two. It wasn't until the doctor asked about my partners." She shook her head. "Do you think he knew? Do you think he did it on purpose?" Darius chose his words carefully. "I'm just gathering information at this point, Miss Monroe, but there are certain coincidences that need to be checked out." Latoya suddenly sat up straight. "There are other women, aren't there? I'm not the only one?" Darius didn't answer, but his silence spoke volumes. "Oh my God," Latoya whispered. "How many of us?" "We're still checking the information," Darius replied evasively. "Can I ask you one more question? Did you notice anything unusual about Leon's behavior, especially when it came to his past, his former relationships?" Latoya thought for a moment. "He didn't like to talk about the past. Once, when I asked him about his exes, he said something like, 'They all got what they deserved.' At the time, I thought he'd been hurt badly, but now..." She looked at Darius with sudden determination. "If he's doing this on purpose, if he's infected other women, you have to stop him, detective. Please." After meeting with Latoya, the picture began to come together. Darius spent the next few days gathering additional information. He studied Leon Tucker's professional history, his social connections, his financial situation. Everything pointed to a successful, respected member of society, an impeccable reputation, a stable career, active participation in community life. But there was one oddity. 10 years ago, Leon Tucker seemed to have been reborn. Prior to that, there was very little information about him, as if he had deliberately erased his past. What happened 10 years ago? What made him change his life? The answer came unexpectedly, from the medical records of Georgetown University Hospital. 10 years ago, Leon Tucker was not a pharmacist, but a resident surgeon. He was a promising doctor whose career was suddenly cut short after he was diagnosed with HIV. Now the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Tucker had been infected 10 years ago, possibly as a result of a relationship that ended painfully. Since then, he had built a new life, a new career, a new identity. But something in him had broken. Something had turned a talented doctor into a man who methodically and cold-bloodedly passed on a deadly virus to unsuspecting women. Darius knew that a direct confrontation was inevitable. But before making any accusations, he had to assess Leon Tucker for himself. He had to understand who he was dealing with, a calculating psychopath or a deeply traumatized man whose suffering had distorted his moral compass. Darius arranged a meeting with Tucker, introducing himself as an insurance company representative conducting a routine check. The meeting was scheduled at Tucker's office in the main Healthway Pharmacy in downtown Georgetown. Leon Tucker looked exactly as Darius had imagined from the photos, a fit, well-groomed man with a neat haircut and an attentive gaze. His white lab coat was immaculately clean, and his handshake was firm and confident. Nothing in his appearance or mannerisms suggested a man capable of deliberate evil. "How can I help you, mister?" Tucker looked questioningly at Darius. "Listen." "Darius, listen," replied the detective, deciding not to hide his real name. "Prime Health Insurance Company." "Of course," Tucker smiled. "Although I don't quite understand why a personal meeting is necessary for a standard check." "Sometimes personal contact is more effective than paperwork," Darius replied, watching Tucker's reaction closely. They sat down in a small office behind the pharmacy counter. Tucker was relaxed, answering questions clearly and to the point. But the longer the conversation continued, the more Darius felt that something else was hidden behind the perfect facade. A cold, calculating mind that carefully controlled every word and every gesture. "Mr. Tucker," Darius moved on to more personal questions. "Our company prides itself on knowing its partners not only professionally. Tell me a little about yourself. Family? Hobbies?" "No family," Tucker replied with a slight smile. "Work takes up most of my time. In my free time, I run and read. I participate in charity projects. It's a good way to give back to society." "Noble," Darius nodded. "And your personal life? Are you in a relationship?" For a moment, something dark flashed in Tucker's eyes, but he quickly regained control. "Serious relationships take time and commitment, Mr. Listen. There's no room for that kind of responsibility in my life right now." "I understand." Darius paused. "By the way, I recently spoke with Latoya Monroe. She spoke very highly of you." It was a direct hit, a test of his reaction. And the reaction followed, a barely noticeable tension in his shoulders, a fleeting shadow crossing his face. "Latoya?" Tucker kept his tone calm. "Yes, we dated for a while. She's a wonderful woman. Unfortunately, sometimes relationships just don't work out no matter how much we want them to." "Of course," Darius agreed. Sometimes people just aren't right for each other. And sometimes people hurt each other. Sometimes even on purpose. Tucker leaned back in his chair, his gaze sharpening. What are you getting at, Mr. Listen? Something tells me you're not here on behalf of an insurance company. Darius paused, looking Tucker straight in the eye. There was something hypnotic about this man, his charisma, his intelligence, his absolute self-control. It was hard to imagine that behind this imposing facade was a man who methodically destroyed the lives of innocent women. You're right, Darius finally said. I'm a detective with the Georgetown Police Department. I have a few questions about your ex-girlfriends, specifically the ones who discovered they were HIV positive after being in a relationship with you. Tucker's face remained impassive, but his eyes flashed with something akin to satisfaction for a moment before becoming impenetrable once more. That's a serious accusation, Detective. His voice was even. I hope you have something more substantial than coincidences and guesswork. 5 women in 2 years, Mr. Tucker. All of them were in relationships with you. All of them found out about their diagnosis after breaking up with you. That's not a coincidence. It's a pattern. Tucker folded his hands on the table. His posture was relaxed, but Darius could feel the tension emanating from him, like a predator ready to pounce. You know, Detective, Tucker leaned forward slightly. Sometimes people see patterns where there aren't any. Our brains are wired to look for meaning even in chaos. They create connections between unrelated events. They see intent where there is only fate. There was a hidden challenge in his words. Darius suddenly realized that he was dealing with a man far more complex and dangerous than he had initially thought. Leon Tucker was not an impulsive criminal or a sociopath incapable of controlling his actions. He was calculating, methodical, and perhaps driven by a motive so powerful that it overshadowed all moral barriers. What happened 10 years ago, Leon? Darius asked quietly. What turned a promising surgeon into a man who does what you do? For the first time in the entire conversation, Tucker's mask faltered. Something like surprise mixed with respect flashed in his eyes. You've done your homework, Detective. Impressive. He leaned back in his chair. But if you've dug that deep, you must know that you have no evidence of intentional infection, and you can't have any. Maybe these women were infected by someone else. Maybe they weren't as selective as they wanted to appear. Maybe I didn't know my own status. So many possibilities, Detective, and so little evidence. He stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. Now, unless you have a warrant or official charges, I'd ask you to leave. I have a lot of work to do. People are waiting for their medication. Darius also stood up, feeling that Tucker had won the first round. But this was only the beginning. Now that he had met this man face to face, he was certain that Leon Tucker was guilty. And behind his actions was a story that Darius was determined to uncover. We'll see each other again, Mr. Tucker, Darius said as he headed for the door. I'll be waiting, Detective, Tucker replied with a slight smile that didn't reach his eyes. Always happy to help the valiant Georgetown police. As he left the pharmacy, Darius couldn't shake the feeling that this first encounter would be followed by a long and complicated game. Something in Tucker's eyes, in his impeccable self-control, spoke of a man who was not only unafraid of being caught, but almost wanted it. It was as if he had been waiting all this time for a worthy opponent who could truly appreciate the sophistication of his revenge. After meeting Leon Tucker, Darius Lisson realized that to solve the case, he would have to dig deeper into the suspect's past. 5 women infected with HIV after having relations with the same man was too serious a coincidence to ignore. But to understand the motive, he needed to find out what had happened 10 years ago, during the period that Tucker seemed to be hiding so carefully. The next morning, Darius began with a visit to the archives of Georgetown University Hospital. Thanks to an old friendship with one of the administrators, he gained access to records of personnel who had worked at the hospital over the past 15 years. The dim light of the archive lamp illuminated the yellowed folders containing the personal files of employees when Darius finally found what he was looking for. Dr. Leon Tucker, a graduate of Georgetown University's medical school, had entered the surgical residency program 11 years earlier. His faculty reviews were glowing. Exceptionally talented, brilliant future, a rare combination of technical skills and empathy for patients. Everything pointed to Tucker being on track for an outstanding career. Darius flipped through the pages until he reached the last entry, a short, dry note. Dismissed from the residency program due to health reasons. Date, March 5th, 2015. No further explanation, no details, just a dry statement of fact. A promising surgeon had suddenly ended his career. "What happened to you, Leon?" Darius muttered, closing the folder. The next step in his investigation was a visit to Dr. Raymond Jackson, the former head of the residency program, who was now retired but still consulting at a private clinic. The elderly man greeted Darius warily, but after Darius explained the situation, without mentioning his suspicions of deliberate infection, of course, he agreed to talk about his former student. Leon Tucker, Dr. Jackson's eyes clouded with memories. One of the most gifted young surgeons I ever taught, the hands of a musician, the mind of a scientist, the heart of a healer. I saw a great future for him. "What happened?" Darius asked. "Why did he leave surgery?" Dr. Jackson sighed heavily. "HIV. He was diagnosed during a routine medical examination. These days, it's not a death sentence, of course, but for a surgeon." He shook his head. Technically, he wasn't banned from operating. Modern protocols allow HIV-positive surgeons to practice under certain conditions, but the atmosphere... His colleagues started avoiding him. Patients, upon learning of his status, refused to have surgery. The administration hinted that his presence was creating problems for the hospital's reputation. "He could have fought it," Darius remarked. "Filed a discrimination suit." "He could have," Jackson agreed. "And he might even have won. But by that time, Leon was broken. He didn't just lose his career, he lost his calling. And all because of the woman he trusted most." Darius perked up. "What do you mean?" "His fiancée," Jackson said. "Yasmin Clark, a nurse in the emergency room. They met here at the hospital and dated for about 2 years. Leon was crazy about her. They were planning to get married." He paused. When Leon was diagnosed with HIV, it came as a shock to everyone. He'd always been careful, never had casual relationships, never used drugs. The only source of infection could have been Yasmin, and she was infected too? "Not just infected." Dr. Jackson lowered his voice, even though there was no one else in the room. "She knew about her status before she met Leon. She hid it from him and continued the relationship, putting him at risk every day. When the truth came out, she just disappeared. She quit her job, changed her phone number, and moved out of the apartment. Leon was left alone, with his career ruined, his heart broken, and a diagnosis that changed his entire life." Darius felt the pieces of the puzzle start to fall into place. Grief, betrayal, and rejection by society are powerful catalysts for personal transformation. But could they turn a talented doctor into a cold-blooded avenger who punishes innocent women for the sins of one? Leaving Dr. Jackson's office, Darius headed to the nearest cafe to organize the information he had received. Leon Tucker had every reason to hate the woman who had ruined his life. But to spread that hatred to all women, to deliberately infect others, was no longer just an act of revenge, but a systematic, cold-blooded crime. The next step was to find Yasmin Clark. If anyone could shed light on Leon's transformation from victim to criminal, it was her. But first, Darius decided to meet with LaToya Monroe again. After their first conversation, she had contacted him to say she had found something that might be important to the investigation. They met in the same cafeteria at the Jefferson Hotel. This time, LaToya looked different, more composed, more determined, as if she had overcome the initial shock of the past few days and was now ready to fight. "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation, Detective," she said as soon as they sat down at a table. "And I went through all of Leon's things that I had left. I found this." She handed Darius a small leather-bound notebook. "Leon left it with me once when he was leaving for work. I looked inside just out of curiosity. I thought maybe it was work notes or a personal diary, but the contents..." She shook her head. "I didn't understand it then, but now after your visit it all makes sense. It's terrifying." Darius opened the notebook. Neat, almost calligraphic handwriting listed women's names, dates, and brief notes. Some names were crossed out, with notes next to them saying completed and dates. Chanel Wilkins, Kimberly Jones, Brianna Higgins, Destiny Brooks, Darius read. And here you are, LaToya Monroe. No completed mark yet. There are more names, LaToya said quietly. Women he probably didn't have time to finish his plan on, and look at the first page. Darius flipped to the beginning. There, on the double-page spread, was a single name, Yasmin Clark, and beneath it, a chilling phrase. For every day of my ruined life, one of them. Let them feel what I feel. Oh my God, Darius muttered. This is practically a confession. When I first saw it, I thought it was some kind of literary experiment, maybe drafts for a novel, LaToya said. Leon sometimes said he wanted to write a book about his life. But now, her voice faltered. I was just one of many, wasn't I? A pawn in his game of revenge? Darius carefully wrapped the notebook in a handkerchief and put it in his jacket's inside pocket. This is important evidence, Miss Monroe, perhaps the most important. With your permission, I'd like to keep it for the investigation. Of course, LaToya nodded. I want him to answer for what he did. To me, to other women. You understand that if it goes to trial, you may have to testify? Reveal your status publicly? LaToya straightened up, her eyes flashing with determination. If it helps stop him, yes, I'm ready. My diagnosis is not my fault, nor is it my shame. It's a crime committed against me, and I won't let shame or fear silence me. Darius looked at her with respect. It was moments like this that reminded him why he had chosen to become a detective, not just to catch criminals, but to help victims find their voice and regain control of their lives. There's something else you might be interested in, LaToya continued. Leon kept a box of things in my storage closet. He said they were just old medical textbooks he didn't know what to do with. I never looked inside before, but yesterday I decided to check. There were books in there, but I also found this. She took a thick envelope out of her bag and handed it to Darius. Inside were photographs. Dozens of photographs of a young black woman with a bright smile and lively eyes. In some of the pictures, she was with Leon. They were hugging, laughing, looking absolutely happy. I think this is Yasmin, LaToya said. The one who started it all. Darius studied the photos carefully. The woman in them seemed alive, energetic, full of joy. It was hard to imagine that she was the cause of such a destructive chain of events. This will help me find her, he said, putting the photos back in the envelope. Thank you, Miss Monroe. You've been very helpful with the investigation. Just find him, Detective, LaToya replied quietly. Stop him before he destroys more lives. After meeting with LaToya, Darius returned to the station and immediately requested information on Yasmin Clark. The results were sparse. After being discharged from the hospital 10 years ago, she seemed to have vanished. No tax returns, no employment records, no social media activity. Either she had changed her name, left the country, or… Darius didn't want to consider the third option, but he had to. What if Leon had already taken revenge on the person who was truly responsible for his suffering? What if Yasmin Clark was long dead, and her disappearance wasn't an escape, but something far more sinister? Checking death and missing persons records also yielded no results. If something had happened to Yasmin, it had not been officially recorded. Darius decided to take a different approach, find relatives or friends who might know her fate. Yasmin Clark's personal file from the hospital archives listed her mother's address in Annapolis. Darius made a few calls and found out that Eleanor Clark still lived at the same address. The next morning, he headed there. Eleanor Clark's house was a modest bungalow in a quiet suburb of Annapolis. Garden gnomes lined the path to the porch, and vegetable and flower beds were visible behind a neatly trimmed hedge. It was a place where there seemed to be no secrets or drama. The door was opened by an elderly woman with tired eyes and gray hair pulled back into a simple bun. Seeing Darius's police badge, she showed no surprise, only a quiet, humble sadness, as if she had been waiting for this moment her entire life. "You're here about Yasmin," she said, not as a question but as a statement. "Yes, ma'am," Darius replied. "I'm Detective Lisson from the Georgetown Police Department. Can I ask you a few questions about your daughter?" Eleanor Clark nodded silently and stepped aside, letting him into the house. The living room was cool and smelled of lavender. On the mantelpiece were photographs of the same young woman from Leon's photos, only at different stages of her life: a child, a teenager, a college graduate, a young nurse in uniform. "Tea?" Eleanor asked as Darius sat down in a worn armchair. No, thank you, he said, taking out a notebook. Mrs. Clark, when was the last time you saw or spoke to Yasmin? Eleanor sat down opposite him, folding her hands in her lap. 9 years and 7 months ago, she replied without hesitation. October 23, 2015. She came to me after she quit her job at the hospital. She was very upset and crying. She said she had made a terrible mistake and now she had to disappear. I begged her to stay, to get help, but she was adamant. I woke up in the morning and she was gone. She left only a note saying that she loved me and would come back someday. And no contact since then? Sometimes I get postcards, Eleanor said. No return address. Just I'm fine. I love you. The last one came about 3 months ago from Miami, but I don't know if she's really there or if she just sent the postcard while passing through. Mrs. Clark, Darius chose his words carefully. Do you know what happened between Yasmin and Dr. Leon Tucker? The elderly woman's face tensed. I know my daughter made a terrible mistake, she said quietly. She found out about her diagnosis and was afraid she would lose Leon if she told him. She convinced herself that the risk of transmission was minimal, that everything would be fine. Eleanor shook her head. When Leon became infected and the truth came out, Yasmin couldn't cope with the guilt. She ran away instead of facing the consequences of her actions. Did you keep in touch with Leon after Yasmin disappeared? I tried, Eleanor replied. I wanted to apologize, offer help, but he didn't want to see me. He said that just hearing the name Clark was enough to make him feel sick. She paused. I don't blame him. What Yasmin did was unforgivable. But she's my daughter, and I know that deep down she's not a bad person. She's just a scared girl who made a terrible mistake and couldn't find the strength to fix it. Mrs. Clark, Darius looked her straight in the eye. There is reason to believe that Dr. Tucker is seeking revenge for what happened to him, not on Yasmin, but on other women, innocent women. Eleanor paled. My God, she whispered. Are you sure? We have serious suspicions and some evidence, Darius replied cautiously. If your daughter contacts you, please ask her to get in touch with me. Her testimony could be critical in stopping the cycle of pain she has unwittingly set in motion. As he left Eleanor Clark's house, Darius felt a heaviness in his heart. Leon and Yasmin's story was tragic from every angle. Betrayal, pain, lives destroyed. But that tragedy did not justify what Leon was doing now. Revenge against the innocent could never be justice. On his way back to Georgetown, Darius received a message from LaToya Monroe. She had found something else in Leon's belongings. An old flash drive with files dating back to his time at the hospital. LaToya couldn't open most of them. They were password protected. But one document was accessible. It was Leon's personal diary, which he had kept in the first months after his diagnosis. Darius headed straight for LaToya. The flash drive could contain key evidence of Leon's intentions, his transformation from victim to criminal. Perhaps enough to finally stop him. LaToya was waiting for him in the hotel lobby, nervously twirling the small black flash drive in her hands. She looked distraught, and Darius immediately realized that she had discovered something really important. I managed to open one of the protected files, she said instead of greeting him. The password was in the same notebook I gave you. It was written in small handwriting on the last page. She handed the flash drive to Darius. There's a list, Detective. A list of 50 women's names and a plan. A detailed plan of how he's going to get revenge. Not just 5 or 10 women. He's not going to stop, Detective. This is his mission. A holy war against all women who, in his mind, represent Yasmin's betrayal. Darius silently took the flash drive. 50 names. 50 potential victims. How many had already been harmed? How many more were to come? There's something else, LaToya continued, lowering her voice. Video files. They show Leon talking to himself. Like he's rehearsing a speech or a confession. In one of them, he talks directly about what he's doing and why. It's a confession, Detective. A direct confession. Have you watched these videos? Darius asked. Only one, LaToya replied. I couldn't watch any more. The way he talks about us, about the women he infected, as if we weren't people but just symbols, a way to get back at Yasmin through us. She shuddered. There's such emptiness in his eyes, Detective. I didn't recognize the man I dated for almost a year. It was as if a monster had always been hiding behind the mask of a charming pharmacist. Darius clenched the flash drive in his palm. Now he had enough evidence to charge Leon. But first, he had to review all the materials, piece together a complete picture of the crime and the motive. That was the only way to ensure that Tucker wouldn't escape punishment on technical grounds or legal loopholes. "Thank you, Miss Monroe," he said. "You have shown exceptional courage and helped us advance the investigation further than I could have hoped. Now I need to carefully study these materials and prepare an official indictment." "Just stop him," LaToya whispered, "before he destroys someone else's life." Back at the office, Darius locked himself in his office and plugged the flash drive into his computer. He spent the next few hours diving into the dark depths of Leon Tucker's mind, reading his diaries, watching videos, analyzing lists of victims, both those who had already been harmed and those who were potential targets. The picture that emerged was both tragic and terrifying. Leon Tucker, a talented doctor whose life had been destroyed by the betrayal of the woman he loved, had methodically turned his pain into a weapon. He wasn't just taking revenge on Yasmin. He had declared war on all women who, in his opinion, were capable of the same betrayal. In one video, dated 3 years earlier, Leon stared straight into the camera with cold determination in his eyes. "They must feel what I feel," he said in a calm, almost detached tone. "Not just physical pain. That's just a tool. They must experience betrayal, rejection, the loss of their future. Each of them is the embodiment of Yasmin. Each deserves what I got. This isn't revenge, it's justice." Darius stopped the recording, feeling a chill run down his spine. In Leon's eyes, he saw not just anger or pain. There was absolute conviction in his righteousness, in the sanctity of his mission. People like that were the most dangerous criminals, those who believed they were committing an act of ultimate justice. After gathering all the evidence and compiling a detailed report, Darius headed to his boss, Lieutenant Zara Freeman. A difficult conversation lay ahead. The case was delicate, potentially high profile, and could cause serious public outcry. Zara Freeman listened to his report, carefully studied the materials provided, and finally nodded. "Take a capture team and go after him," she said. "A man like that shouldn't be allowed to remain free for another minute." Darius assembled his team and devised a plan for the arrest. Leon Tucker was smart and cautious. They couldn't let him suspect anything and have time to escape or destroy any additional evidence he might have at home or elsewhere. The arrest warrant was obtained by evening. The first stop on the arrest plan was Tucker's home, a luxurious apartment in a historic building in downtown Georgetown. When the team arrived, however, they were met with an unpleasant surprise. The apartment was empty. Tucker's personal belongings were gone, the closets were open, and the trash can contained the remains of burned papers. "He knew," Darius said grimly. "Somehow he found out we were coming for him." A citywide manhunt was immediately launched, and airports, train stations, and car rental offices were checked. But Leon Tucker had vanished into thin air, just like Yasmin Clark had once done. Perhaps he had been planning his disappearance for a long time, anticipating that sooner or later his scheme for revenge would be uncovered. When he returned to the office, Darius found an unmarked envelope with no return address on his desk. Inside was a single page, written in familiar calligraphy. "Detective, listen. I must admit, you have impressed me with your persistence and insight. Few could have solved the puzzle I unwittingly created so quickly. But don't think this is the end. My work is not done. The list is still long, and my determination has not wavered one iota. Perhaps we will meet again. In the meantime, I will continue my mission elsewhere, where no one knows my past and cannot connect the dots as you have done. Sincerely, Leon Tucker. P.S. If you're still looking for Yasmin, try looking under the foundation of the old shed in her mother's backyard." She never left Annapolis that October night. Darius clenched the letter in his hand, feeling the blood drain from his veins. Was Leon implying that he had killed Yasmin? This changed everything. From a criminal avenging the sins of one innocent person, he was now a serial killer whose actions had gone far beyond even the most twisted sense of justice. A search of Eleanor Clark's house was immediately organized. A team of forensic experts began digging in an old shed at the back of the garden, and when human remains were recovered from there a few hours later, the last piece of the puzzle fell into place. Leon Tucker began his bloody odyssey with the murder of the woman who ruined his life, but instead of putting an end to his story of revenge, he had only just begun it, creating a complex, twisted scheme to punish innocent women for a sin they did not commit. Now that Tucker was gone, the investigation took on a new dimension. It was no longer just a hunt for a serial killer, but a search for a murderer capable of inflicting even greater harm. A nationwide manhunt was launched immediately, and Tucker's photo and description were sent to every police station in the country. LaToya Monroe and the other victims were given protection in case Tucker decided to return and take revenge on those who had helped expose him. But Darius knew that Leon was too smart to make such an obvious mistake. He had probably already changed his appearance and name, and may even have left the country. The meeting with LaToya after Yasmin's body was found was difficult. She sat across from Darius in his office, pale and shaken by the new discoveries. "I can't believe I shared a bed with a murderer," she whispered. "How could I not have seen the darkness in him?" "He was very good at putting up a front," Darius replied gently. "He spent years practicing how to hide his true nature." "You couldn't have known." "What now?" LaToya asked. "Will he just disappear and continue killing somewhere else?" "We'll find him," Darius said confidently, though he wasn't so optimistic inside. "Now we know who he is and what he's done. It's only a matter of time." LaToya nodded, but her eyes betrayed her doubts. She understood better than anyone the deviousness of Leon Tucker's mind, his ability to manipulate and deceive. "You know," she said after a pause, "despite everything he did to me, to other women, to Yasmin, part of me still feels sorry for him. Not excusing him, never, but I feel sorry for the young doctor whose life was destroyed by a single act of betrayal. He could have saved so many lives, but instead, he chose to destroy them." Darius understood that feeling. Deep down, he too saw the tragedy in Leon's transformation from healer to destroyer, from victim to monster. This did not diminish his guilt or justify his crimes, but it added a dimension of human tragedy to the story, which began with one fateful lie and grew into a series of crimes that affected dozens of innocent lives. "We will continue the search," Darius assured LaToya, "and when we find him, justice will be served. Not revenge, not retribution, but justice, the very thing he twisted beyond recognition in his mind." Leaving Darius's office, LaToya paused in the doorway and turned back. "Find him, detective," she said quietly but firmly. "Not for me or the other victims, for his own sake, to stop this vicious cycle of pain that he has created and that will ultimately destroy him too." Darius nodded, understanding the profound truth in her words. Leon Tucker was not only a criminal, but also a victim of his own pain, his anger, his inability to accept and survive betrayal. And until he was stopped, this cycle of pain and destruction would only expand, drawing more and more lives into its vortex. For 3 days, Darius Lisson did not leave the police station, sleeping on an uncomfortable sofa in the break room and eating nothing but coffee and sandwiches from a vending machine. The Leon Tucker case had become a personal mission for him. He didn't just want to arrest the criminal. He wanted to understand him, to see the whole picture of how a talented surgeon had turned into a methodical, calculating monster. On the board in his office, a story unfolded from photographs, notes, and clues. In the center was Leon Tucker's face, flanked by his victims, 5 women, 5 ruined lives. And somewhere among them was the first victim, the catalyst for the whole tragedy, Yasmin Clark, whose remains were still being examined by forensic experts trying to determine the exact cause and time of death. "You look terrible," said Lieutenant Zara Freeman, entering the office with 2 cups of coffee. "When was the last time you were home?" Darius rubbed his tired eyes. "I don't remember." "Tucker is still out there, Zara. He may be choosing his next victim right now." "We've issued a nationwide warrant for his arrest," Freeman said, handing him a cup. "His photo is at every airport, train station, and border crossing. He can't get far." "He's smart," Darius shook his head, "and he planned his disappearance in advance. I'm sure he has fake documents, a backup hideout, maybe even a new identity. Then what do you suggest? Zara asked. Sit here until we drop from exhaustion? Darius looked thoughtfully at the board. He's too proud to just disappear, he said slowly. With his revenge, he's proving something not only to the world, but to himself. I think he'll contact me. He'll want to explain, to justify himself. That's a risky bet, Freeman frowned. But it's the only one we have, Darius replied. His premonition proved correct the next morning. When he arrived at the office, he found an unmarked envelope with no return address on his desk. Inside was a ticket to an exhibition at the National Gallery of Art and a note, Today, 2 p.m., Impressionist Hall, come alone, LT. Darius immediately called a meeting with the capture team. The plan was simple. He would go alone, but plainclothes agents would be stationed behind every column in every room. Snipers would take up positions on the upper floors of the gallery. As soon as Tucker appeared, they would not let him leave. Don't try to detain him yourself, Zara warned. He's dangerous and most likely armed. Just keep him where he is until the team moves in. Darius nodded, though he had his doubts that everything would go so smoothly. Something told him that Leon Tucker had chosen a public place for a reason. He had a plan, and Darius didn't yet know what it was. At 1:30 p.m., Darius was already in the gallery, slowly strolling among the impressionist paintings, pretending to be completely absorbed in the art. There were few visitors, mostly tourists and a few school groups. He knew that among them were his colleagues, inconspicuous but ready to act at the first signal. At exactly 2 o'clock, he felt a presence behind him, a slight movement of air, the faint scent of expensive cologne. There was no need to turn around. He knew who was standing behind him. Glad you could make it, Detective. Leon Tucker's quiet voice was calm and friendly, as if they were old friends meeting at an exhibition. Please don't turn around, and don't try to signal your colleagues. I know they're here. Why this meeting, Tucker? Darius asked, just as quietly. You know you can't get out of here. I didn't come here to leave. Leon's voice had a strange calmness to it. I came to make you understand. All of them, he gestured toward the other visitors, see only a monster. But you, Detective, you dug deeper. You found Yasmin, didn't you? We found her remains, Darius confirmed. 10 years in the ground. Was that your first murder? Murder? Leon laughed softly. No, Detective. It was justice. The only justice I could get. He took a step and stood next to Darius, looking at the painting in front of them. A stormy sea, thunderclouds, a tiny boat lost in the waves. Beautiful, isn't it? Leon said. The chaos of the elements and the fragility of human life. That's exactly how I felt when I found out about my diagnosis. Like I was in a tiny boat in the middle of a storm. That doesn't justify what you did to those innocent women, Darius said firmly. Innocent? Leon turned to him, and Darius saw his face for the first time since the hunt began. It had changed. It was gaunt, his eyes sunken, but they burned with a strange, almost religious fire. No one is innocent, Detective. Each of them carried the seed of betrayal within them, just like Yasmin. Their time just hadn't come yet. You're not God to judge, Darius objected. No, Leon agreed. I'm just an instrument of fate, an emissary of justice. He took a few steps along the wall of paintings, and Darius followed him, signaling to the agents not to interfere. While Tucker was talking, it was important to let him speak, to get a confession that would be irrefutable evidence in court. You already know my story, Leon continued. A brilliant young surgeon, engaged to a nurse, a future full of promise, and then the diagnosis that destroyed everything. Do you know how I felt when I found out? Not anger, not despair, confusion. I was sure it was a mistake. I didn't use drugs, I didn't have casual relationships. Yasmin was my only partner. Leon stopped in front of another painting, a portrait of a young woman with sad eyes. When I asked her, she denied everything at first. Then she cried and begged me to forgive her. She said she had found out about her status shortly before we met, but was afraid of losing me if she told me the truth. His voice grew harsher. She preferred to put me at risk of death just to keep me by her side. Pure selfishness. The quintessence of female nature. That was the act of one woman, not all women, Darius remarked. Do you think so? Leon turned to him with a sad smile. Then why didn't any of my last 5 partners ask a simple question, even when I insisted on unprotected sex? Why didn't any of them demand to be tested? They all wanted love and affection so desperately that they were willing to risk their own health, just like Yasmin. You deliberately deceived them, Darius objected. You told them you got tested regularly. Yes, I did, Leon nodded. And they believed you without asking for proof, because they wanted to believe. It was their choice, Detective. I just showed them the consequences of blind faith. They moved slowly across the room, looking like 2 friends discussing art. Darius saw his colleagues ready for action, but kept them under control with his gaze. Not yet. Tell me what happened to Yasmin, he suggested, knowing that this was the key to Tucker's psychology. Leon's eyes clouded over for a moment, as if he were looking into the distant past. After I learned the truth, I was devastated. I couldn't work, sleep, or eat. I was taken off surgery. Shaky hands aren't a surgeon's best asset. My colleagues started avoiding me, and patients refused to be treated by a contaminated doctor. And Yasmin, she just disappeared. She ran away from the consequences, leaving me alone to deal with the nightmare she had created. He paused, staring into space. I found her 2 months later. She was hiding at her mother's house in Annapolis. When I got there, the old woman was at church. Yasmin and I were left alone. Leon spoke almost dreamily. You know what the most amazing thing was? She wasn't afraid. She thought I had come to forgive her, to take her back. She threw herself into my arms with apologies, promises, plans for the future. But that's not why you came, Darius said quietly. No, Leon shook his head. I came for justice. I wanted her to understand what she had done, what it means to betray the trust of someone who loves you more than life itself. He fell silent, and Darius did not rush him. The confession had to come naturally. I didn't plan to kill her, Leon finally continued. I just wanted to talk, to vent my pain. But when she started making plans, talking about our life together as if nothing had happened, something inside me broke. I saw her true self. Selfish, deceitful, incapable of real empathy. And I realized that she would never understand what she had done. She would never truly repent. And you decided to become her judge and executioner, said Darius. I decided to become an instrument of karma, Leon corrected him. Women's necks are so fragile, Detective, especially those of petite women like Yasmin. A few minutes of pressure is enough to end it all. She didn't even resist. Until the very end, she didn't believe that the man she betrayed was capable of such a thing. That was her last mistake. Leon spoke of the murder calmly, as if it were a routine medical procedure. Darius felt a chill run down his spine. Before him was a man completely cut off from normal human emotions, living in a distorted reality of his own righteousness. I buried her in the garden while her mother was at church, Leon continued. An old shed, loose soil, the perfect place. And then I left, feeling strangely calm. I thought it was over, that the ghosts of the past had let me go. But they didn't, Darius remarked. No, Leon smiled sadly. They turned into something more, a mission. I started seeing Yasmin in every woman, the same ability to betray, the same ease with which they put their desires above the well-being of those they supposedly love. And I realized that Yasmin's death was not the end, but the beginning of my true calling. Spreading disease among innocent women, Darius said harshly. No, Detective. Leon looked at him almost condescendingly. An awakening. I didn't just infect them, I made them experience what I had experienced. First trust, then betrayal, then the realization that life would never be the same again. It wasn't an act of cruelty, it was a lesson, a profound, transformative experience. A lesson no one asked for, Darius objected. You destroyed the lives of 5 women, Tucker. Maybe more. We're still gathering information. This isn't a mission. It's a series of serious crimes. Leon shook his head, like a disappointed teacher facing a slow student. You're only seeing the surface, Detective. You don't see the deeper meaning. However, he sighed, I didn't expect you to understand completely. What's important is that you heard my story, that you know the truth. They stopped at the exit of the room. Darius sensed that the conversation was coming to an end, and discreetly signaled his men to get ready. "Why did you come here today, Tucker?" he asked. "Why risk your freedom when you could have just disappeared?" "Because my work is done, Detective," Leon replied simply. There were 50 names on my list. 50 women, each of whom was to experience betrayal just as I did. Yesterday I met the last one. The circle is complete. Darius tensed. Another victim they didn't know about. "Who is she? Where is she now?" "Her name is Eleanor Clark," Leon replied with a slight smile. "Yasmin's mother. She just found out that all these years she's been receiving postcards not from her daughter, but from me. That her beloved girl has been lying in the ground in her own backyard for 10 years. And that I, whom she tried to comfort after Yasmin's disappearance, had been her daughter's killer all this time." He glanced at his watch. "And now she's about to receive a package with another surprise. A little gift from me. A syringe with my blood and instructions on how to use it to kill herself. Of course, she may not follow the advice, but—" He shrugged. "The old lady is very religious. The thought that she had unwittingly harbored her daughter's killer for 10 years might be unbearable." Darius immediately took out his phone and dialed a number. "Send a unit to Eleanor Clark's address in Annapolis immediately. Possible suicide attempt. Intercept a package from Leon Tucker." After making the call, he turned to Leon, his eyes cold with rage. "You really are a monster, Tucker. You belong in a cage." "Perhaps," Leon agreed calmly. "But I accomplished my mission. 50 lives for one ruined life. A fair trade, don't you think?" He raised his hands to show he wasn't resisting. "I'm ready, Detective. Arrest me." Darius gave a signal, and plainclothes agents immediately surrounded them. 2 officers twisted Leon's arms behind his back and handcuffed him. Leon did not resist. On the contrary, his face was frozen in an expression of strange peace, almost bliss. "You don't understand, Detective," he said as he was being led away. "I won. Even now, even under arrest, I won. Because my mission is complete, and the pain I have caused will spread for years. Like a virus. Like justice." Later, sitting in his office, Darius pored over Tucker's case file. The confession had been recorded, both by the agent's hidden microphones and the gallery's surveillance cameras. It was irrefutable proof of his guilt. Eleanor Clark had been saved. The police had arrived in time to intercept the deadly package. But the psychological trauma inflicted on her by Tucker's revelations was perhaps worse than the physical threat. In total, the police counted 47 victims of Leon Tucker, women of different ages, social status, and race. They had only one thing in common. They all had the misfortune of crossing paths with a man who turned personal trauma into a weapon of mass destruction. Psychiatrists who evaluated Tucker after his arrest were unanimous in their conclusions. Despite his obvious mental disorder, he was fully sane and aware of the nature of his actions. He was not considered a psychopath in the clinical sense. He experienced emotions and understood the pain of others, but his moral compass was so distorted by trauma that his crimes seemed like acts of justice to him. "How are you?" Zara Freeman asked as she entered Darius's office late in the evening. "Tough case. One of the hardest," Darius admitted. "Not because of the complexity of the investigation, but because of understanding." "Understanding?" Zara raised an eyebrow in surprise. "I understand how he became who he is," Darius said quietly. "I don't excuse him, never, but I understand the path from a talented doctor full of compassion to a monster who sees nothing but his own pain. Just one twist of fate, and a life that could have been devoted to saving others became a tool of destruction." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "That's our job, isn't it? Not just catching the bad guys, but understanding how they got that way, so that we can prevent new ones from emerging." "Yes," agreed Darius, "but sometimes understanding brings more pain than ignorance." He gathered his papers into a folder and stood up. It was time to go home to his daughter, who had probably gone without dinner again because of his obsession with work. A little life that depended on him, a reminder that even in the darkest times, it was important to keep the light inside. Before leaving, Darius glanced once more at the photograph of Leon Tucker. The man in the picture was smiling, openly, sincerely, his eyes shining with intelligence and kindness. It was hard to imagine that behind that smile lay a soul twisted beyond recognition by pain. "That's what grief does to us," Darius whispered as he put the photo back in the folder. "It turns the best into the worst, love into hate, healing into destruction." That was the lesson he had learned from the case of Leon Tucker. A lesson about how thin the line is between victim and executioner, between righteous anger and blind revenge, and about how important it is not to cross that line, even when the pain seems unbearable. Turning off the lights in his office, Darius quietly closed the door behind him. Another case awaited him, another story of human tragedy. But today, he just wanted to go home, hug his daughter, and remind himself that even in the darkest world, there is always room for light.